Welcome to the deep dive.
It's great to be here.
Our mission today is, I think, a really fascinating one. We're going to take a core philosophical framework from one of the most successful investors in modern history.
Right. And then we're going to trace how these ideas, fallibility and reflexivity, actually became this profound critique of global capitalism.
The very system that, generated his incredible wealth.
It's a huge contradiction. We're diving into excerpts from his book, Open Society Reforming Global Capitalism Reconsidered. And what's so unique is that this author, he's a prototypical capitalist.
Absolutely.
But he started out writing an article called The Capitalist Threat. He genuinely sees this dominance of market ideology as a real danger.
And the source material, it just starts with this surprising amount of candor. He opens up by admitting these major miscalculations he made back in his 1998 analysis.
Oh, yeah. He says he totally underestimated the power of financial authorities, like the Federal Reserve, to, protect the system.
And more than that, he admits he just completely missed the internet revolution, the tsunami that was happening right under his nose.
Which is amazing to think about.
But what's really crucial here for our deep dive is that this wasn't just him correcting the record. Admitting error is the cornerstone of his entire philosophy.
Exactly. He's trying to incorporate the ideas of a lifetime open society, democracy, and this concept of radical fallibility. For him, recognizing your mistakes is the real starting point for everything.
So we have to start there with that philosophical engine, the ideas of fallibility and reflexivity.
Let's tackle reflexivity first. It sounds a bit academic.
It does. So let's unpack this. We're told it's a two-way connection between thinking and reality. Why should that matter to you listening right now?
Well, because it's the fundamental difference between social reality and, say, natural reality. Think of it like this. In the natural world, if you believe gravity doesn't exist,
You're still going off the roof.
you are still going to fall off the roof.
Yeah.
The reality of gravity is, completely independent of what you think. The stars don't care about your opinions.
Right.
But in the social sphere, in markets, in politics, what people think actively affects the situation they're thinking about.
And then that changed situation feeds back and changes their thinking again.
It's a constant, never-ending feedback loop. Your belief becomes part of the data.
So the outcome of any social event, an election, a market crash, is inherently dependent on what we all think and do.
Which brings us straight to the problem of imperfect understanding. Because the outcome depends on our beliefs and actions. Our thinking in the social world can't really qualify as knowledge in the scientific sense.
It's not like predicting the path of a planet.
Not at all. When you predict a stock price, your prediction is tangled up with millions of other people's predictions. And that introduces a radical uncertainty.
And that uncertainty leads us right to fallibility.
Right. Fallibility, in its sort of moderate form, is just that, the gap between our thinking and what's actually going on. We misunderstand things.
And that leads to unintended consequences.
But here's the genius of his open society concept. It flips that negative being wrong into a positive.
An opportunity.
Precisely. If we accept that we're imperfect, well, then we can improve. Recognizing fallibility allows for critical thinking, for error-correcting mechanisms. An open society is one that accepts its own imperfection and is always, open to improvement.
It's a society that never claims to have the final, ultimate answer.
Never. And he connected this right back to his own success. He developed what he called radical fallibility.
His personal operational philosophy.
Yeah, his working hypothesis as an investor. It forced him to actively look for the flaws in every investment idea, even his own, especially his own.
He's seeking out situations where his view was, and I think this is a quote, at loggerheads with the prevailing wisdom.
Because that's where the profit was. The gap between what everyone believed and what was really happening.
This is the key psychological shift, I think. For him, discovering an error was a source of joy rather than regret.
It's so counterintuitive.
It is. It meant he could cut his losses or find a better idea. But most of us, we just deny our mistakes, we cover them up, we rationalize them.
He tells this really telling story about visiting Argentina after its debt crisis. He asked the politicians what they would do differently now.
And what did they say?
Every single one of them said they'd apply the exact same policies they used before the crash.
Wow, so they learned absolutely nothing.
Nothing, because they just refused to admit the initial idea was flawed, and that denial is the complete opposite of what an open society needs.
Okay, so if that's the personal framework, how did he see these principles playing out in the real world of global financial markets?
Well, it leads him to demand that we abandon two really cherished ideas in traditional
Which
economics:
are?
the assumption of rational behavior and the whole concept of equilibrium, the idea that markets are always self-correcting.
So his point is that financial markets are always in disequilibrium. They're always moving towards or away from some equilibrium that you can't even really pin down.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean it's completely random, and that's the tension.
How so?
He argues that reflexivity makes that connection between price and underlying value really, really tenuous. Yes, fundamentals influence prices.
But, and this is the crucial part, the prices, the valuations can also influence the fundamentals.
Yes, if a company's stock price is flying high, it can raise capital for cheap. It can use its stock like cash to buy other companies. Its success becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy,
And we as participants aren't just trying to figure out today's value, we're trying to guess the future price.
which just magnifies the role of bias and momentum. And this is what creates his classic boom-bust model.
The archetype.
It starts with a prevailing bias. This new technology can't fail, and a prevailing trend. The trend gets reinforced by the bias, and things accelerate.
Like the dot-com mania in the 90s.
A perfect example. Then you hit the moment of truth, when reality just can't keep up with the hype,
Which is followed by that nervous, kind of drawn-out twilight period.
where everyone keeps playing the game, just hoping some greater fool will buy them out at a higher price.
Until you hit that crossover point.
And then you get the catastrophic acceleration, the crash. And he notes that it's asymmetric. The boom is slow and drawn out.
The bust is quick and brutal.
Right. And what's really destabilizing, he says, is that once investors recognize this is how markets work, that recognition itself becomes a problem.
Because they stop focusing on value and just start chasing trends.
Exactly. It becomes all about technical factors and speculation. And this creates what he calls the stability dilemma. If people ignore reflexivity, markets seem stable, but they're vulnerable.
But if they recognize it, stability can't be preserved by the market alone. It has to become an objective of public policy.
Right.
Regulation.
And he says this is made even worse by modern trends, like big institutions that are just focused on relative performance beating and index, and the explosion of derivatives that are built on this, possibly flawed, efficient market theory.
So instability isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's built into the system because of human psychology.
And he argues this same instability is mirrored in our political world.
What's the crucial problem he points to there?
The serious mismatch between our global economy, which is stateless, and our political systems, which are still based on the sovereignty of the state.
Capital is mobile, governments are not.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
Capital can just get up and leave, so governments have to cater to it. They can't tax it too much, can't regulate it too much.
Which hurts the state's ability to do what citizens expect it to do: social justice, environmental protection.
All of that. And this connects directly to the health of democracy. He says the link between capitalism and democracy is far from automatic.
Business interests, both local and foreign, can often end up helping repressive regimes.
Yeah, the biggest threat he sees are these unholy alliances between government and business. He points to historical examples like fascism and more modern ones in places like Russia or Malaysia.
Where democratic institutions are just a shell and state power is really just used to enrich private interests.
And this all points to a structural flaw in the whole global system that was set up after World War II.
The Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the UN.
They were built for a world where capital didn't move freely across borders. So when the financial crisis hit in the late 90s, they just weren't equipped to handle it.
So the solution seems clear. As states get weaker, international institutions have to get stronger. Why hasn't that happened?
In a word, market fundamentalism. This ideology that markets are perfect, self-correcting, and that any kind of government interference is bad. It stands directly in the way of building stronger international rules.
He argues the invisible hand of the market shouldn't be mistaken for, a moral guide.
Precisely. And he doesn't spare the U.S. in this critique. He says its unilateralist posture is a serious threat to world peace. It wants rules for others, but won't abide by them itself.
And we should be clear, for anyone listening who supports a strong national posture, this can be a tough critique to hear. The source isn't really ignoring the geopolitical pressures the U.S. might feel.
Not at all. But his point is that demanding to be the exception to the rule undermines the very framework you need for a stable, open, global society.
So if the answer is a rules-based international system, that brings us to his big ideal, the open society.
And he admits the original Cold War idea of open versus closed was just too simple.
Right. A closed society collapsing doesn't automatically lead to an open one.
It can just lead to chaos. He uses this really helpful tripartite model. He says open society is this precarious middle ground, kind of near equilibrium, and it's threatened on one side by closed society, which is rigid, static.
And on the other by chaos or revolution, which is dynamic, fast-moving disequilibrium.
And he traces this idea back to this deeply personal experience, surviving Nazi-occupied Hungary. His father realized it was a far from equilibrium situation where, and this is a quote, the normal rules did not apply.
And that required a whole different way of thinking just to survive.
That ability to see when the system is broken is really the core of his motivation. And to fix it, he proposes an alliance of democracies.
A political alliance, kind of like a counterpart to NATO.
Exactly. Aimed at fostering open societies around the world and creating stronger international rules. And he says this alliance should focus on affirmative action and crisis prevention, using incentives, not just punishments.
What's a good example of that?
Well, instead of just penalizing poor countries for failing to meet, say, high environmental standards that they can't afford.
The rich countries should help them pay for it.
Yes. Provide incentives, provide assistance to enable them to comply. It's about building capacity, not just passing judgment.
And we can see the cost of failing to do this in his analysis of Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed.
He says the West was just guided by that same market fundamentalist bias. It blocked any real engagement. We gave them a lot of words, a lot of advice.
But not the money they actually needed.
Right. And the result was what he calls robber capitalism.
This is where the infamous loans for shares scheme comes in.
The very mechanism that created the oligarchs. State assets were basically handed over to insiders. And the West just stood by, kind of blinded by this idea that any privatization is good privatization.
So his conclusion is that the West really lost Russia and failed to bring it into the community of open societies because we treated them like beggars and put our ideology ahead of actual practical help.
A huge missed opportunity.
So we've covered the philosophy, the markets, the geopolitics, and the proposed solution. What does this whole deep dive mean for you, the listener?
I think we have to go back to the central lesson. The world of human affairs is defined by fallibility and reflexivity. Perfection is impossible. Systems are inherently uncertain.
And that leaves you with a really complex dilemma. The author argues you have to strictly separate your role as a market participant.
Where you pursue self-interest, where it's amoral.
From your role as a political participant, where you have to be guided by the public interest, by a sense of right and wrong.
That's the conflict. Markets run on amoral principles. But a society, a democracy, needs a moral foundation to make collective decisions. And the dominance of pure market values threatens to erode that very foundation.
It's a powerful challenge. And finally, he leaves us with this provocative thought about what progress even means.
Right. He argues it doesn't come from finding some ultimate final truth. It comes from accepting our own imperfection and just constantly striving to improve.
Personally and as a society.
He even suggests that since you can't solve every problem, sometimes the best you can do is to keep fighting the losing battles, like human rights activists do.
Because that fight is what keeps the flame of freedom alive. It's what moves us closer to that ideal of an open society, even if we never fully get there.
So the question for you to mull over is this. In your own life, your own work, your own beliefs, what imperfections are you willing to accept and really analyze in order to make that kind of continuous error-driven improvement possible?
Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.